Yeah, that's
Okay. All right. Well, hello, everybody. Hey, thanks for joining us. I'm Lindsay Davis, CEO of Spartan Invest. I am welcoming Stephanie Devine. Stephanie.
Hey, everybody. I'm Stephanie Devine, Director of Property Management here at Atlas Rental Property. Still hard to say that after the change. But.
Right. For those who don't know, we recently changed our property management name. It was Alabama Rental Property, but we just ventured into Chattanooga, Tennessee. So we had to change from Alabama Rental Property to Atlas Rental Property. Still have the short abbreviation of ARP. So I can't get away from that. So I'm glad we were able to keep that
still, because I am struggling. It's tough. But.
Right. Well, so if you're joining us for the very first time, so we started Sips with Spartan. That sounds very, very country, very Alabama of me. I apologize. So we started the SIPS episodes to really connect with all of our investor clients and anybody interested in turnkey real estate. And we started it as a way to communicate about what was going on in the Birmingham and Alabama market during COVID. You know, in March 2020, I don't have to tell anybody, but it was chaos and nobody knew what was going on. And we kind of made this as a way to say, okay, let's take a deep dive into what's going on with our leasing during COVID and our closings and what are the trends. And so we're here again to unfortunately have to talk about COVID, where I know everybody's sick about it. But one of the things that we're diving in today is the emergency rental assistance. And Stephanie is going to be the go-to, the expert, the SIPS expert for this episode.
Ooh, that's a lot of buildup, Lindsay.
That is. We are expecting a lot, but there is so much information and so much data out there. And what we found is that investors who are trying to figure it out on their own are having a lot of difficulty just kind of maneuvering all of this money. So before we get into a lot of the questions, just really quick. So the emergency rental assistance, and I've got my notes here, because like I said, it's got a lot, there's just a ton of information out there. But what was it? So it was the funds that was distributed through the stimulus due to COVID as a way to allow families to stay in their homes during this health crisis, and also contribute to the landlords who were essentially during the eviction moratorium were stuck not being able to evict if the tenant was paying due to loss of job or various other reasons. So that is essentially what the emergency rental assistance was for. So the purpose of these funds, Stephanie, I'm going to kick it back to you now. What was essentially the really detailed purpose of the ERA money?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously it's a nationwide economic stimulus. You know, we want to help keep people in their homes and also be able to pay landlords as well. So, and you kind of touched on that obviously, but the frustration, you know, obviously one of the biggest things as a landlord you never want to deal with is an eviction. And while we weren't able to file evictions for a really long time, this also helps the tenant to come out of this out of this eviction moratorium without a huge balance on their ledger. You know, it allows people who did lose their jobs, who had to stay home from, work because they had to help their kids with virtual school. They had to care for another person in their family. Whatever the case was, they were able to use these funds to pay off their ledger and also to get future assistance in advance, when we knew that they were going to be able to, or they were going to suffer in the months to come too. So this money is absolutely helped so many of our tenants, and our team has worked really hard for it. And a lot of this stuff that we're going to talk about today, there are a lot more details and there's a lot of complexities behind it, even just here in the state of Alabama alone, and even nationwide, of course. But all of these agencies and grantees who are passing out this money, there's a lot of different processes, there's a lot of different organizations. So bear with us as we kind of go into all of it and explain all of it, and just know that we're providing details for Alabama and the stats here. So
right, I mean, that is where you and our champion, our ERA champion, Joanne, I mean, this is where they have been eat, sleep, breathing and stuff. So we know all things of the Alabama, but can't really necessarily speak to what the other states are. Right. But if you have a turnkey property with us or are interested in Alabama, this is going to be a lot of really good information. So the guidelines in the ERA assistance, we had the eviction moratorium. I mean, we know it's been up and down, up and down.
We've
It
been
was
on an emotional roller coaster for a really long
a
time.
really long time. And of course, we know though that the Biden administration came in and reinforced after the expiration date of the eviction moratorium. They came back, reinforced it, and then the Supreme Court overturned that as unconstitutional. So what changed after that?
So changes that we've seen after that, just a lot of things really. It's really a trickle down effect outside of even rental assistance, but we're getting, a really high volume of applicants, of people who are applying with us, who are moving out of their houses, people that are now worried about eviction because evictions are legal again. There is a pretty big backlog, of course. So, it's not moving probably as quickly as a lot of landlords would hope, but, we've also been able to use that and increase our application volume with ERA because they prioritize people when they're in eviction or they're facing eviction. So when they're processing the application, that is prioritized because the purpose of this money is to keep people out of eviction. So if that's something somebody's facing, that is absolutely a priority to people. So yeah.
Well, okay. All right. So tell me about the example with your tenant's ledger and being paid, because with the eviction moratorium expiration, and then if the property had already been vacated, what happens in that regard? Because what if we didn't get the money in time? Or talk a little bit about that, because I know that there are a lot of investors out there that have large balances and haven't been able to do anything about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, once the moratorium got overruled and, we were able to evict people again, the Biden administration went in and said, hey, let's make it a little bit easier for people to qualify for these funds. So some rules did change when it comes to dispersing these funds and qualifying for these funds. So, which is great, but it's still, it is a little shocking too, though. So somebody doesn't necessarily have to have even been affected by COVID now. That was one of the things that
really
they needed to prove prior to all of this, that they were affected by COVID, that, maybe they lost some hours or they had to stay home to homeschool or whatever the case may be. But now they can just provide a self-attestation that that they're behind in their rent, rental ledgers, that kind of thing. And so we had a tenant personally that moved in July of 2020 and did not pay rent the entire year. And the application got denied because the tenant had moved out. But once the restrictions changed, the ledger was terminated and we were still able to collect on those balances for the tenant, because technically, the tenant is left with this huge balance, even though they were really affected by COVID. And so after the regulations changed, they are now able to pay out on terminated ledgers, which has been really helpful to a lot of our tenants and a lot of our investors. We've been able to collect some of those funds that the tenant would really never be able to pay most of the time. Like, you have a $10,000 balance plus your attorney fees on top of that. I mean, it's just unrealistic to think that someone's going to be able to pay on that in a reasonable time frame. So that's been really, really helpful to a lot of our investors that have had endured some long months and years without any rental payments on their houses. But
yeah, I mean, and that's the point of real estate, right? Of real estate investing, at least, is cash flow, is your return. And if your tenant is occupying the property and we're unable to get that cash flow, I mean, that affects the landlord, because most of the time the property owner is still responsible for the mortgage payment.
Yeah.
So that's huge. So
there.
What was the difference? What was the change? Was it the end of the eviction moratorium that changed the guidelines to allow terminated ledgers to now be eligible for ERA assistance?
Yeah, so they really wanted to be able, and there was also some difficulties with the disbursement of the funds on a state level and things like that. So there's just been a lot of steps, essentially 12 steps, if you want to get with the third party application company. They really want to be super detailed, which is absolutely understandable. We don't want these funds to go into the wrong hands or towards the wrong thing, but the funds were not being dispersed in a timely manner. We put our first applications in March 1st, the first day we could, and we did not see our first payment from ERA, Alabama, until August, 6 months later.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was very depressing after all the hours spent during those 6 months. But, they really wanted to be able to push those funds out a little bit quicker. So loosening up those restrictions a little bit, it allowed more people to qualify and to be able to process applications quicker. So that was after the moratorium ended and, more people were at risk. So you want to be able to disperse those funds a little bit quicker and more leniently.
Right. Which makes sense, because if the money wasn't ready to disperse in March when they opened the application process, that doesn't mean that there weren't people still accumulating the debt in that 6 months.
Absolutely.
Which, I mean, that makes sense for the change in guidelines. So let's say I don't have Atlas rental property. I'm solo investor and I've got a property in Alabama. What does the application process look like? Like, what do you do if you want to capitalize on these funds for your tenants?
Yeah, great question. So initially, when this all opened up, we, took initiative the first day, obviously March 1st, we were gung ho. We were so excited. We put in 300 application for current tenants, past tenants.
We had a lot of people in the office working on them. I know that.
Full task force, full court press. But we started filling out these applications on behalf of the tenants. It's a 2-part application essentially. So the landlord has to do a part, the tenant has to do a part. And we started initiating all of those applications on behalf of the tenant. They'd have to go in and provide all the documentation and fill out their portion. Since then, obviously we're about 9 months out from that time. So the applications have changed a little bit. There's more grantees that are involved. There's more geographical areas that have their own agencies that are dispersing these funds within Alabama. So since then, it's been, the tenant really needs to initiate the application. They need to reach out to the provider in that area that is in charge of dispersing those funds for that geographical area. If they're not in one of those areas in Alabama, they would go to the state level and apply there. And then once they do that, then the application comes to us. We fill out our portion. We provide the ledger and the lease and all of the things that the tenant provided. They match it all up to make sure there's no fraud going on, to make sure everything is, in compliance with all the rules, regulations, and that everybody has everything on file that they need. And then from there, teams review it and then they disperse it. And on average, it's taking about 2 months for the applications to get fully processed from the time that they go in, because there is such a backlog.
Man, okay, so all right, so if you've got a property, it depends on where it is, based on the population, to where you actually send the tenant to apply, and then you have to fill out your portion. Tenant has to match that.
Yeah.
And then it finally gets reviewed.
Right. And then they may come back and ask for more things, or, they may come back and say the tenant needs that, there's a lot of things that both parties have to provide. And then, we do follow up on the applications too. If we haven't had any movement in a certain amount of time, we're going to say, hey, where is this application? Why is it still in the same status that it was in 30 days ago? And we're following up with these people. Our team has created relationships with the, disbursement teams and the application teams at these grantees offices throughout the state where we operate in. So it's been a lot of work. So if you're an individual, good luck, I guess is what I could say. But we've got it pretty much down to a science as much as we can right now. There's been a lot of changes and it's all new to everybody.
It's new to everybody. Yeah. So the entire process is brand new to the people dispersing the funds, the people trying to receive the funds and apply for them. One of our listeners, hey, Eric, how's it going? This is a great question. So can we see if new renters, so if a tenant's coming to apply with us, can we see if they've received ERA funds? Ooh, that is a good question. Yeah. That. Or if they left a prior rental without paying. And I know that that's an issue that we're running into, is that if they did receive the funds and they were going to be an eviction, with that eviction didn't get processed. And so it's not on their record. So, I mean, our application process right now is taking 4 to 5 days because we want to make sure we are getting a hold of that previous landlord.
So I guess one of the ways that we would combat that. So the short answer is no, we can't go in and get a history of any prior applications that they've put in with their specific, especially if, if they're moving from Birmingham City to Jefferson County, completely separate systems, that kind of thing. So we could have potentially asked the tenant and hope that they give us an honest answer if they've been part of the program before, but technically it wouldn't really matter. They can go in and reapply, and the agency should deny you based on the geographical location if they're not in the right location and applying with the right grantee. However, if they move from one area to another and they truly qualify in a year span for both programs, they would probably get approved. But our application process, I would say one thing that we do that would prevent a tenant from ending with a zero balance, if you will, even though they went a year without paying, is we do ask how many times that tenant was late in the past 12 months that they've lived with the previous landlord. That's part of our rental reference verification. So even if they left with a zero balance, technically they would have been late 12 times in the last year. We would fill that out on a rental verification. Hopefully another landlord would do the same for us in doing that verification check. So I would hope we'd be able to catch it that way. But truly, if there's nothing in the system and we aren't able to, gain that rental reference for whatever reason, the agencies aren't going to release the tenant's private information to us. So.
Right. Yeah. Especially if we weren't on the other side of that application and stuff. That's a really good question. But
really great question.
Yeah. And that's one thing that I know that our application team, our leasing team, they've combated a lot of issues with that, because these evictions are not on anybody's record. Because they haven't been able to be filed. So that's such a tricky thing.
We've seen a huge increase in our applications, but not a huge correlating increase in our approvals, which is, I think, it's a good sign. It's a great sign. That means, we're doing our due diligence and making sure that this is actually what's not happening, what we were just talking about. So, making sure that we're doing the diligence and checking with the previous landlord that they didn't have any past dues, that type of thing. Because unfortunately, increased applications means increased legwork, increased admin work for not a whole lot of extra benefits. We're still, we're historically tracking with exactly where we need to be right now. But, if you were looking at our applications and our showings and our leads, you would think that our numbers, would be through the roof, but you've got all this unprecedented movement right now with people changing houses and wanting to get a fresh start and that kind of thing. So
that's just such a tricky water to maneuver. So aside from not necessarily being able to access a previous or a potential tenant's previous rental performance, what are some other hiccups that you guys have seen or frustrations? Now, like I said, this is something that, the government has put into place, and then smaller municipality governments have then had to distribute. So just saying it out loud, I can imagine there's about 700 frustrations.
But what are some of
them?
So I guess kind of bringing it all back to the beginning. So the ERA Alabama platform opened up March 1st. We, hustled and got all of our applications in that first day and throughout the rest of that week. And they ended up changing the platform and told us we did it all wrong. All 300 or however many, it was like 240, I think exactly. Not scarred for life or anything, but they ended up telling us that we did it all wrong. But the way that they had the platform set up only, allowed us to do it that way. And it was just so new to everybody. Obviously, it was such a huge rollout, was such a new program in these waters that nobody has ever navigated before. There's bound to be some frustrations on all ends. So, that was when we kind of decided, like, hey, Joanne, you're going to be all hands on deck, because we need to move all these applications to our landlord ID. And then we had to be reaching out to all the tenants to get their landlord IDs to, to merge the applications. And then another really frustrating thing for everybody was, they provide you with a phone number to call and answer questions and things like that. And we would call and everybody would have different answers. And we're like, oh my goodness, how do we get through this? And it's just been a really, really slow process altogether. We were out of the 326 million that was granted to us through the ERA 1, the first act that was put in place. Alabama has only distributed $40 million. So only 15% of the funds that were given to us in round one, which was late 2020, has been dispersed. So
only 15% of the funds in Alabama.
Only 15%.
So Alabama got the 326 million. And 15, wow.
$40 million of that has been dispersed.
Why so low?
There is so there is a company, a third-party processor that's processing all the applications that come in through ERA Alabama. Now, this doesn't speak to the other geographical agencies that are handling some of the other more high-density areas, but ERA Alabama is using a third-party agency, Horn, and they have the 12-step process, and it's just going super slow, and it's just, they're not making a priority to get these through the system very quickly. And it's funny because Joanne she stays up on all the news articles on this stuff. So we were talking to her about it, and she was like, yeah, Texas, who, by the way, if anyone's from Texas, shout out to you guys. But in Texas, 100% of their funds have been dispersed. What? And they were initially, awesome. They were initially using Horn, and they saw how slowly it was going and that nothing was getting dispersed. And so they ended up going through another provider. And I'm sure that was a huge pain, because everything was set up and whatever, but they made this decision to change and got everything dispersed. So now Alabama has had to submit a proposal to the Department of Treasury for their plan in dispersing the rest of the funds and the ERA to disbursement, so that we can even be included in that, because we've been so slow at dispersing the initial funds. It's been, it's interesting.
So of the 15%, do we know kind of where that's been dispersed? Has it been mainly Birmingham? Has it?
I don't know the answer to that question. I'm sure we could figure it out, but nationwide, there's 51 state grantees, and then there's almost 300 local grantees, which in Alabama there I think are 11 locals and 1 state, but it's about 50-50 that where the state has dispersed about 50 nationwide and the locals have dispersed about 50. But personally, here in our company, we have been much more successful with getting disbursements from the local agencies, meaning like the city of Birmingham, the Jefferson counties, the bridge ministries, the more local agencies. Recently,
talk a little bit more. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. No, but I just wanted to know more about, because ERA is for the rural, and we are Alabama, and so a lot of our territories are rural, which is which can be a negative in some, I guess, markets, but in Alabama it's definitely seen as a pro, especially to our potential tenants. But what are some of the other I guess companies? Is it companies or entities, agencies that are in charge of the higher populated areas?
So in Huntsville, they use the Catholic Care Center of Concern.
Well, that's a mouthful.
I may be saying that a little bit wrong, but in Huntsville, they use that organization. They have done a great job. And then in Birmingham, they're using Bridge Ministries and Urban League, and there's a special kind of caring that's also distributing some of the funds in Birmingham. There's all kinds of agencies and grantees that are distributing these funds. And I do believe they all have to be nonprofit agencies, but there's not a whole lot of vetting that goes on with these agencies. But I guess probably the bigger thing is they need to be able to manage it. It's a big undertaking, because there's such a backlog of these applicants, people waiting for these funds. And the application process, there's a lot of, government regulations. You've got to prove your income. You've got to prove your job history. You've got to be able to prove, your expenses and, all these things. So it's a big job for anybody, really. So.
Oh, I mean, it sounds very, very complicated. So how long are the funds available? What does our timeline look like? Because I know that they've put the timelines on there, and I know that they've changed, and some of the regulations and guidelines have changed. So what does that timeline look like right now?
So the funds were essentially announced, and late 2020. So we knew about this money, everything, that the applications were going to open March. So it really started in March, and then it's still ongoing. It was supposed to end at the end of September. Like the deadline for ERA 1 was September 30, but Alabama has been so slow in getting the funds out that we are still on ERA 1. We have not yet been dispersed ERA 2 yet. We do expect there to be a decision made sometime right in the beginning of the year on the allocation that Alabama is going to get for ERA 2, because if they don't have a great plan for disbursement, they may not get as much funds as they were initially allocated. So, so there has been a recent push to get a lot of this money out. And I mean, we've had a close contact at Urban League that they've got really steep goals to meet for giving out money every week. It's pretty unbelievable how, you know, they have all this money to give out, and we have to drag the tenants in and tell them, go apply for this money. It's there for you. Like, we are trying to help you get these funds. So it's been
that's challenging too, because it's such a two-way street. It's so mutually beneficial that you would think that piece of it would be a little bit easier,
right?
You know, so kudos to Atlas and to you and to Joanne for, you know, staying on top of that.
Thank you. Yeah.
So put Atlas, I guess, in perspective when it comes to Alabama. So 15% has been dispersed. What is our I guess, received rate, or, you know, I guess funds received?
So we are just under $1 million collected. We're really, really proud of that. Because
yes, we are. That's awesome.
We're super proud of that, because I truly believe if it were not for the team's effort, that we would be nowhere close to that. Because I mean, the work that Joanne has put in, and Shaquita and team, I mean, we have physically gone to people's houses. We have, you know, set up our partners in office. We have made, you know, appointments for tenants. We are doing everything we can to get these funds in the hands of the tenants and the investors, and really just to bring it all together, because it's mutually, you know, so mutually beneficial, like you were saying. But that being said, so almost $1 million, we definitely want to get there by the end of the year. We've got a big push for that, and we definitely will. So this is kind of like a happy fact and like a little bit of a depressing fact, but ERA 2, once that gets dispersed, it could be dispersed throughout 2025. So we could
my gosh,
we could be really dealing with ERA and rental assistance money through 2025. So, I mean, it's great that the assistance is going to be around, but I really didn't think that we would be dealing with something so unknown for so long. I mean, surely by that time it won't be unknown anymore, but I was like, 2025, you've got to be kidding me.
So long. That's I would not have expected that, honestly.
No,
as well.
Me neither. Yeah.
That's very, very shocking. And I do want to say too that the team here going out to our tenants' houses, setting up, we had kind of like an open house that we had here, where we brought in Bridge Ministries and other agencies that Urban League. I'm sorry, did I say it wrong? I'm sorry. Brought them in for a time. It's like, hey, come sit at our office for X hours. And then we told all of the tenants to come here. Which is, and again, that's another depressing but exciting kind of statement, in that
all the bittersweets,
the bittersweets is that the funds are available, but the fact that we had to work so hard and coordinate so many different angles and efforts to get tenants in here and get those funds dispersed for our investors, you know, to make sure that they were made whole, and that they can see that return, they can see that that income from their rental investments. Yeah,
and I think there's just, you know, obviously a lot of confusion out there, and especially with our tenant population, you know, people just didn't really know where to go to get the rental assistance. They didn't really know who qualified. They didn't really know, you know, that they don't have to be behind on rent. You don't necessarily need to be behind on rent. You don't necessarily need to be a low income person, you know, depending on your dependents and your expenses. I mean, of course, they take in income and median income into play, but, you know, just getting the education out there that this funding is available for people in need. And,
Right.
you don't have to have a $10,000 balance. You can be current now, but you may know that you have some situations coming up in the next couple of months, because tenants can apply for up to 3 months in advance in addition to arrears, and they will have to continue reapplying once that money is used, if they still qualify for it. But just getting the education out there about who qualifies and that there are different agencies and we are here to help has been, that's been a huge part of the success, I think, of the team. So
right. And just letting everyone know, like you said, we're just here to help you guys apply and get these funds. We are working both for the investor and for our tenants to make sure that they're taken care of. So I know you said round 2, possibly 2025, which is crazy.
I really hope.
I hope not as well, but we haven't started round 2 yet. So we don't really know what round 2 looks like. Even.
No, not here in Alabama. We are slated to get $258 million for round 2, but none of those funds have been dispersed and the round has not started yet. We should find out early 2022 of that portion, if we're going to get the whole thing or if we're only going to get a portion of it based on, the plan of action for dispersing it, because the disbursement's been so poor up until this point. So
one thing that obviously our headquarters is here in Birmingham, Alabama. And even though Alabama's been very on the lower end for ERA disbursements, one thing I do want to brag about Alabama is the lack of additional guidance and restrictions on the evictions. In that, hey, look, so if somebody has been affected, if your family or if one of our tenants' families has been affected by COVID negatively and they are having difficulty paying their rent, they are going to be safe. Those, however, who do not fit into that bucket, Alabama has not put additional restrictions and additional guidelines in place to continue to house those residents. So that's one of the positives as well, that kind of goes hand in hand when we're talking about ERA, that's worth noting.
Yeah, absolutely. Alabama has always been a landlord friendly state, and that's one of the draws to Alabama and turnkey properties here. But in the recent climate of the world and the US, there's just been a lot of additional restrictions that have been placed on landlords, and certain states are taking extra precautions that might have already been a little bit harsher on landlords. So it's been really it's been a relief for sure to know that everybody is on our side as far, obviously we want to help the people that need help, but we still are able to take the action needed if we need to take it. So that's been a relief on our end, because with all of this added stress and added additional moratoriums and rental assistance and CARES Act, there's just been so many things to navigate over the last year and a half or more. It's just been unbelievable, but we're here, we're standing, and we're forging on, and we are moving forward, and it's been great. So I can't say it's been great, but it's good. It's been great recently being able to kind of put a lot of this into more of an organized fashion and be able to feel more confident and comfortable with everything. So
and being able to take action on those who need it in regards to receiving the funds, and those that may need to move in an opposite direction and kind of seek housing outside of Atlas. So it's that I 100% agree. And I do believe that there are some states that are still under a state eviction moratorium. Even with all of this assistance, even in a state in Alabama where you're over $300 million that is sitting there, that's, ready to be dispersed, there are still some states that have all of those funds and still have eviction moratoriums. So, Alabama taking care of the property owners and the tenants. That is really good to see. All right. So any other closing comments on ERA? I know that was a lot of information, and it can be a bit much.
It is a lot. And there's a lot. there's a lot more. I mean, every day we're learning new things, every day something new comes to our plate, and it's all good now. We're kind of used to kind of going with the flow and putting it all together. And I will just say, if ERA payments were to stop today, if we didn't get any funding for round 2 and they were to stop us, I mean, I feel really confident in saying to, our team members and our investors and our tenants, like, we have done everything in our power to collect everything we can for our tenants and for our investors. I mean, we're just so proud of everything that our team has accomplished on behalf of everybody involved. And it's been challenging for sure, but at the end of the day, that's what it's about,
right?
Helping everybody use the funding and the tools that are out there to, keep everything going as normal as possible, which is not a thing anymore. So
yeah,
keep the normalcy. So,
yeah, I'm done with hearing kind of the new normal. So
yeah, I'm done with that too.
Yeah. The going with the flow is, I think, the slogan for the last 2 years.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
I'm so happy to be a part of Atlas and seeing how they've progressed through the unknown and kind of maneuvered all of that. All right. So in closing, do you want to invite everyone in February of 2022? We're inviting everybody to Birmingham, Alabama, as well as Huntsville. We're going to be taking a trip up to Huntsville and then having our Spartan Summit in Birmingham, Alabama, February 2022. We're going to have some great speakers available, really dive into not just turnkey real estate, but investment in general, tax strategies. We've got Damon John, Aaron Chapman, Heather Melson. We've got a lot of really, really, really great speakers that are going to really dive into all things investment, real estate.
Don't forget
and
property management.
Property management, Mark Cunningham. I won't forget. Yeah, all things property management and really take a look at a turnkey market. Have a summit. So many of these real estate summits and seminars are in Las Vegas and Miami, where it makes no sense to purchase a turnkey rental property. So that's why we started our Spartan Summit is, hey, look, we want to give as much content, as much education as possible. That's why we started these SIPs. That's what we want to be. We want to be a source and a tool for you guys. So please, if you have any questions, if you're interested, check us out, spartaninvest.com for more information about the summit. Stephanie, thank you so much for
so
this was so much information.
Yes.
All right.